Okay, finally, section C, attachment. A and B, question 11, about Zara's baby Sunta. Loads of you got it the wrong way round, which is a worry. Definitely make sure you know about interactional synchrony and reciprocity and which is which. So A is reciprocity. We know it's reciprocity because it's turn taking. So Zara sticks her tongue out at Sunta and Sunta does the same thing back to her. She doesn't mirror it, she does it back in response. That's a response. I know I said that you have to be careful in the examples you give the examiner. So give a different response, but here the example is being a beast and has given the same, but it does very clearly say it's a response. It says, does it back to her. So I agree that's tricky, but that is turn taking. Whereas the other one, heads seem to move in time with one another. That means at the same time. That's interactional synchrony, that's mirroring. So that tells me that when we revise this next year, we need to do a bit more work on that. Now, the question 12, 2 marks on an issue, drawing conclusions about caregiver-infant interaction. The best answers refer to the fact that we're not sure whether infants are intentionally engaging in reciprocity or whether they're just sort of doing it by mistake and it's being judged as intentional. And that's because babies' brains have not developed at the rate where they can actually control their muscle movements. They were really good answers, well done. Some of you came up with some other problems, like actually infants are a really problematic sample because they need constant attention, they get very hungry, thirsty, need attention. They're a difficult group to work with, and it means that research is really drawn out and difficult and has to be repeated. Some of you talked about like inter-rater reliability and how we can't necessarily trust the opinion of one researcher. There were some really good answers there, well done. Right, number 13, the 6 marker on Holly and maternal deprivation was a problem. It was a problem because you used the wrong theory. So maternal deprivation is not the same as monotropic theory. So this is not the Maskey-C thing that we did first. It is not that. Maternal deprivation is something we studied later after we'd studied institutionalisation and the Romanian orphans. Do you remember? So this is the idea of loss of attachment. An infant has formed a bond with a parent, but for whatever reason it's taken away during the critical period, and this has massive physical, social, emotional, behavioural consequences. And what you needed to do was tell me what maternal deprivation is, and then tell me why Holly is likely to be suffering from that and where the evidence is. So, for example, she's performing poorly in her end of year tests, so her IQ is clearly impacted. She's been involved in a fight and she's disruptive. Could suggest the beginnings of affectionist psychopathy or behavioural issues, which are typical for deprivation. Yeah, her parents are right to be worried because we know that children that have suffered from deprivation go on to have difficult relationships further down the line. So yeah, they should be worried. And it's clear that she has suffered from deprivation because she was put in foster care at 6 months. So she's had 6 months to form a bond, then she's lost it, and she's been to 5 different foster care homes by the age of 6. So she's not had a great time. So people drop marks if they use the wrong theory, because it's not Maskey-C, monotropic, it's maternal deprivation. They are different. And if you didn't refer to the STEM enough, if you didn't cover all aspects of it, it's there for a reason. They don't just put random sentences in, they want you to refer to all of it. Okay, guys. And then we had question 14, outline the findings of one animal study in attachment. So you need to be careful with these. 3 marks for findings alone, do you remember, means 3 distinctive findings. So think really carefully. Right, we've got Harlow with his monkeys, or Lorenz and his geese. Which one do I know 3 distinct findings for? Now, you can be clever here, but if you've started writing the conclusion is, that's not findings, that's instantly 0 marks. So if you've written for example, let's talk about Harlow and Harlow. They found that monkeys spent the majority of time on the cloth mother and very little time on the feeding mother. They found that they ran to the cloth mother when scared. The conclusion is, or this shows, that feeding is not the basis of attachment, or this disputes learning theory. Okay, well, there's no marks for that. You get 0 marks for this shows, because that's that's inferring, that's drawing out conclusions. If you had written a further finding is that learning theory is not the basis of attachment, that's different because you've set it up differently. So I had a fight with my line manager about this because I said that's not fair, that conclusions are a form of finding, and they disagreed. And yeah, basically no one's got any marks if they've used that kind of language. It's findings only. You stick to the question. So look at the findings that I've identified for you on the PowerPoint slide for both Harlow and Lorenz. Look at the wording you have used, and if you get a question like this again, make sure you stick to findings. And if it's easier, write them as 3 separate bullet points. That's so much more straightforward. Then you know you've covered 3 things. Then 17, a limitation of the study you've referred to. I'm really unsure how you could get 3 marks unless you refer to anything other than extrapolation of data. Across the whole country, I don't think anybody managed it unless they'd referred to extrapolation. So the first mark, extrapolation of data, is the issue. Just because something is the case for a monkey or a goose does not mean it's the same for a human, so we've got to apply those results with caution. That's still only 2 marks. In order to get the 3rd mark, you need to give an example. So you need to say, for example, the critical period for geese is like a matter of hours, whereas in humans it's 2 years. Yeah? Or the critical period for monkeys is 90 days, in humans it's 2 years. I did see one really good answer across the country where they'd used Guiton to contradict Lorenz. So they'd done Lorenz for question 14, and then they'd used Guiton for question 15, and said that, and they described Guiton's study, fine, and the findings and the conclusion, and then explained that that refutes Lorenz, because Lorenz found that imprinting was irreversible. Once they'd imprinted, that was it. Whereas Guiton found it could be reversed. And so that was the only one I ever marked where actually there was 3 marks worth. Some people went into ethics, but they didn't give enough information really in order to get 3 marks for ethics. That was really hard to do. So I'd always go for the more sciencey stuff. Right, question 18. So this looks like a beast, but it's not a beast. It says, discuss findings from studies that have investigated the role of the father. You could literally just follow my PowerPoint. Findings from studies is basically what's written on the PowerPoint about dad as playmate, yeah? And then there's the biological explanation, which is a finding. It's a theory, but it's a finding, it's an idea. So studies have shown that, which is why it's a theory. And also, like you could talk about the social explanation about role models. So have a look at the stuff I've put on the PowerPoint, but that was one way of doing it, literally just turning my theory into findings and following the PowerPoint exactly. Or you could literally talk about, say, 2 studies for the AO1, which would be fine because it's only 3 marks. So you could do field, and you could do, what else might you want to do? Loads of students actually across the country pulled in Schaffer and Emerson here and said that the majority of infants didn't have a secondary attachment figure, which was normally dad, until after 10 months, which was an interesting way of doing the AO1. They kind of linked 2 theories together. Of course, that's true, but I didn't teach that in Role of the Father. So you could pick any 2 studies, basically. You could do McCallum and Gullenbach, Lee, Hardy, Field, anyone you wanted as the AO1. And then the AO3, look at other studies that back up or go against Field or Lee. Look at implications. What does that mean for us? Look at ethics about socially sensitive research. And if we're suggesting, like McCallum and Gullenbach are, that dads aren't necessary, like that's not great. What's that going to do to a dad, to their self-esteem, to their sense of worth? Are we going to end up with changes in laws where actually dads who have become fathers through IVF, like sperm donation, actually legally they never have to give their name, so their child can't ever contact them, because what's the point, because they're not needed anyway? Like, how far is that going to go? So anything on the PowerPoint was fair game. All you needed to do was alter the way you presented the information, so you're changing it from a theory to a finding, because obviously theories were once findings. That is how they began. I don't know if we've ever really talked about that, but that's obviously where theories come from. Research has been published, it's gone through the process. That's how theory construction works, right? It started as a study. Yes, we have talked about that. So theories are findings from studies that are then continuously tested, contradicted, retested, discussed. So you could just follow the PowerPoint exactly. But it is worded cheekily. So what we'll do before you do your mock in January is we'll practice another one of these questions so that it doesn't throw you if it happens again. But you just needed 3 good AO3 points when you'd presented some findings. Okay.